The sun rose slowly over the quiet neighborhood of Willow Creek, painting every roof in gold and every lawn in light. It was the kind of morning where everything felt calm, except for the faint sound of a man digging in the soil. He knelt in his yard, his hands dark with dirt, a gentle smile on his face. His small house sat on the corner of the street, surrounded by tall trees that swayed softly with the morning wind. He had lived there for years, quietly, without ever causing trouble. His garden was his pride and peace. It wasn't just a collection of plants. It was a story. Every flower, every stone, every vine had meaning. He had planted them one by one, year after year, transforming the once empty yard into a living painting. Bright yellow marigolds lined the old stone path that led to a small birdbath in the center. Ferns swayed like green waves under the trees. The air smelled of lavender and earth. It wasn't a rich man's garden. It was a patient man's masterpiece. Neighbors often stopped to watch him work. Some smiled, some even complimented him, but others only stared, whispering quietly. The neighborhood's HOA had strict rules. Every lawn had to be plain, clean, and uniform. Anything too colorful, too different, too alive, was labeled a violation. Still, he never cared. He wasn't growing his garden for approval. He was growing it for peace. But peace never lasted long in Willow Creek. The HOA always needed someone to control, and that morning, they decided it would be him. As he was watering a patch of wildflowers near the fence, he noticed something bright stuck to his mailbox, an orange envelope flapping in the wind. He walked closer, wiping sweat from his forehead, and pulled it off. The bold black letters made his stomach drop. Notice of violation, $5,000 fine. He opened it slowly, scanning the words. You are hereby fined for maintaining an unapproved and unsightly garden that violates community standards. His jaw tightened. Unsightly, he muttered under his breath. He looked around at his garden, the sunlight bouncing off the leaves, butterflies landing softly on petals. It was beautiful, not ugly. His hands shook slightly as he turned the page, reading the final line, failure to comply within 14 days may result in further penalties and property lien. He took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, but a spark of anger burned quietly inside him. He walked back inside, washed his hands, and picked up his phone. He called the HOA office, asking to speak with the president. She's in a meeting, the assistant said in a flat tone. You can attend the next HOA board session if you have an appeal. Fine, he said. I'll be there. That evening, he printed pictures of his garden, his planting permits, and documents showing the plants were approved native species. When he arrived at the community hall for the meeting, the room was full of people, mostly older residents, sitting in neat rows like obedient students. At the front sat the HOA president, a tall woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and a smile that looked polite but wasn't. Ah, Mr. Bennett, she said, recognizing him as he walked in. Please, take a seat. We were just discussing community aesthetics. Her tone dripped with superiority. He sat quietly, waiting for his turn. When she finally called his name, he stood, holding his folder. I received this notice today, he said calmly. It says my garden is a violation. But everything I planted follows HOA rules. These plants are native. They help the environment. She crossed her arms, pretending to listen. Mr. Bennett, while your intentions may be good, your garden doesn't align with the visual harmony of the neighborhood. Visual harmony, he repeated. I'm growing flowers, not garbage. She smiled coldly. We have standards. Uniform lawns, trimmed bushes, and approved color palettes. Your property doesn't fit that image. You'll need to remove the unapproved plants or face penalties. But I have approval, he said, opening his folder and showing her the permits. These were submitted last year. You signed them. She looked at the papers, then leaned back. Yes, well, we've updated the landscaping policy since then. You'll need to comply with the new version. He stared at her, disbelief spreading across his face. You can't just change the rules after the fact. We can, she said calmly. It's in the HOA bylaws. Rules evolve to maintain community value. A murmur spread through the room. Some residents shifted uncomfortably. The man clenched his jaw. "You're not maintaining value," he said softly. "You're destroying what makes this place human." Her smile faded for a moment, but she quickly replaced it. "Mr. Bennett, I suggest you lower your tone. This is not personal." "It is when you fine people for beauty," he replied. She straightened, eyes narrowing. "You have 14 days to fix this." Meeting adjourned. He looked around the room, seeing a few sympathetic faces, but most turned away, afraid to be on his side. He gathered his papers and walked out without another word. Outside, the air was cool, the moon rising behind the trees. He looked at his garden, glowing faintly under the night sky, the flowers moving gently in the wind. It looked peaceful, too peaceful for the kind of war that was coming. He knelt beside the old stone path, running his hand across the rough surface. "You have no idea what you're looking at," he whispered to the memory of the HOA president's voice. "But you will." The next morning, he received another letter, a warning that inspectors would arrive soon to evaluate compliance. He folded it carefully and placed it in a box labeled evidence. He had already started collecting everything. He knew from experience that people like her didn't care about truth. They cared about control. But what she didn't know was that his garden held more than just flowers. Hidden beneath the soil and stones was history, the kind of history that could rewrite everything she thought she ruled. Each rock in his garden wasn't random. They had been placed decades ago by his grandfather, who helped preserve the first botanical site in the area before the city was even built. His garden wasn't a violation, it was heritage. And if they wanted to fight, he would make sure they learned what happens when arrogance meets roots deeper than law. That night, he wrote in his notebook, his handwriting steady and sharp. "They fined me $5,000 for growing history," he wrote. "Let's see how much they pay when history grows back." He closed the notebook and placed it beside the orange notice, his eyes calm now. The war had already begun, and the garden, once a place of peace, was about to become his greatest weapon. The next few weeks turned his peaceful home into a battlefield disguised as suburbia. The HOA began their campaign quietly at first, sending polite reminders, followed by not-so-polite letters. Each envelope came printed with that same red stamp across the top, violation notice. Every time he saw one, his jaw tightened a little more. They claimed his garden attracted insects, that the rocks near his fence were safety hazards, that his vines were spreading beyond the property line. Lies stacked upon lies. He kept every letter, every photo they sent, slipping them neatly into the box marked evidence. They thought they were wearing him down. They didn't realize they were giving him the rope to hang their own arrogance. The HOA president, Mrs. Aldridge, enjoyed every second of it. She drove by in her shiny SUV every morning, pretending to check on other homes, but always slowing down when she reached his property. Sometimes she'd stop completely, step out, and stand on the sidewalk, pretending to take pictures of weeds. The neighbors watched from behind curtains, too afraid to say anything. The man never shouted, never argued. He'd just look up from his gardening, nod politely, and return to his work as if her power meant nothing. That calmness drove her mad. One afternoon, as he was trimming the lavender near the path, he heard her voice from behind him. "You're wasting your time," she said sharply. He stood, turning slowly to face her. She had that smug smile again, the kind that said she already believed she'd won. "Excuse me," he asked softly. "We've warned you 3 times," she said. "Your garden doesn't meet our community standards. The board has decided to move forward with legal action." He crossed his arms, his eyes steady. "Legal action," he repeated, his tone quiet. "For growing flowers." "For breaking rules," she corrected, straightening her blazer. "Rules keep this place valuable." He looked around the street. Every house looked the same bushes, same white fences, same trimmed grass that barely lived. "Valuable," he said. "It looks like a painting where someone used only one color." She frowned, not understanding his words. "You'll hear from our attorney soon," she said coldly, turning to leave. As she walked away, he said softly, "Be careful what you try to destroy. Some things grow back stronger." She didn't respond, but he saw her shoulders tense before she got into her car. That night, another notice appeared on his door, an official fine increase for non-compliance. The total now reads $7,500. He sat at his desk, the letter lit by a single lamp. He wasn't angry anymore. He was focused. He opened his laptop and started researching property rights, environmental protection laws, and historic preservation acts. He read until the early hours of the morning, taking notes, copying clauses, building something far more powerful than any appeal, a plan. Meanwhile, the HOA's tactics grew worse. They sent inspectors to survey his yard, pretending to check for zoning issues. He filmed every visit. He even caught one inspector stepping onto his land to take samples without permission. When he asked for identification, the man stammered, "HOA request, sir," before hurrying away. Each incident went into his growing folder of proof. The neighborhood's mood shifted. Some people avoided him, afraid to anger the HOA by speaking to him. Others whispered quietly, dropping kind words when no one was around. "Don't give up," one woman said one evening as she walked her dog past his house. "That garden's the only beautiful thing here." He smiled politely. "They won't stop," he said. She looked around nervously before whispering, "Then don't either." The next morning, the HOA placed a sign near his front gate, "Property under violation, pending enforcement." It was public humiliation. They wanted the entire neighborhood to see him as a problem. He stood there for a long time, staring at the sign, then reached out and tore it from the ground with one firm pull. "If they want a fight," he said quietly, "I'll give them one they'll never forget." He spent the next few days documenting everything, the stone layout, plant species, even the soil type. His grandfather's old notebook lay open beside him, filled with sketches and notes about native plants that once covered the area before houses existed. The more he studied, the more he realized something remarkable. The layout of his garden wasn't random. It matched an old city map, an exact recreation of a historical botanical site from the early 1800s. That discovery changed everything. He stayed up late that night, staring at the old map beside the new one. The paths aligned perfectly, down to the curve near the oak tree. His property sat on the last surviving piece of land from the city's original settlement. His grandfather must have known. "You clever old man," he whispered. The next morning, as HOA volunteers marched up to take more photos, he greeted them with a calm smile. "Take as many as you like," he said, holding the old map in his hand. "You're documenting history." They looked confused but kept working. Behind them, Mrs. Aldridge arrived, heels clicking on the pavement. "What's this nonsense now?" she said, glaring at the map. "This," he replied, "is older than your HOA, older than your bylaws. And soon, it'll be protected." Her smirk faltered for the first time. "Protected?" she repeated. He nodded slowly. "You'll see." That night, he contacted the local historical preservation office, sending photos of his property, old records, and his grandfather's designs. He didn't know if it would work, but he had nothing left to lose. The next day, when he checked his email, his heart skipped. There was a reply. "Mr. Bennett," it read, "we'd like to schedule an on-site evaluation. Your property may qualify for heritage preservation status." He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "It's starting," he whispered. Outside, the wind rustled through the flowers, as if the garden itself knew what was coming. While the HOA believed they were closing in on him, they were unknowingly walking straight into their own defeat. The war they started over a few flowers was about to turn into something much bigger, a story that would make their entire power crumble. Days turned into weeks, and what began as annoyance grew into a war of nerves. The HOA didn't slow down. If anything, they pushed harder. Every time he thought they couldn't go lower, they found a way. They started fining him for things that didn't even exist: overgrown weeds, soil erosion, visual disturbance to neighboring properties. They sent another letter threatening legal seizure if he didn't pay. But he didn't flinch. Every fine, every word, every fake violation was just fuel. His calm didn't mean weakness, it meant calculation. He had stopped reacting long ago. Now he was planning. One morning, he woke up to the sound of loud machinery. When he looked out the window, his stomach turned. The HOA had hired landscapers. They were standing on his lawn, holding chainsaws and shovels, ready to tear everything down. He rushed outside, his voice sharp but steady. "You step on that soil, and I'll have you arrested for property damage." The men hesitated, looking at each other. One of them mumbled and said, "This is authorized work." He turned toward the black SUV parked near the curb. Mrs. Aldridge stood there, sunglasses on, arms folded, her smile smug and cruel. "You're trespassing," he said coldly. "Get off my property." "This is an HOA enforcement," she replied smoothly. "You've had months to comply. Consider this a community service." He took a slow step forward, his voice dropping low. "You're making a big mistake." She smirked. "We'll see." But the landscapers didn't move. They could feel the tension, the weight of something they didn't understand. Finally, one of them said quietly, "He's right. We can't do this without a court order." Her smile cracked. "Fine," she snapped. "We'll get one." She got back in her SUV and drove off, the tires screeching down the street. He stood there for a long time after they left, staring at his garden. The flowers trembling in the wind, the birds flying away from the noise. His hands curled into fists. "Enough," he whispered. That night, he gathered everything, the letters, the photos, the fake violations, and laid them out on his dining table. It looked like a crime scene, and in a way, it was. The HOA had left fingerprints all over their corruption. He spent hours organizing, cross-referencing, and highlighting details. Every false claim, every sudden rule change, every signature forged by the same hand, it was all there. Then he turned to the other side of the table, where his grandfather's old notebook lay open beside the historical map. The garden designs were almost identical. His grandfather had designed this layout after studying the original plans of the city's first botanical site, the one destroyed during early development. His property wasn't just a yard. It was the last living record of that place. He felt something shift inside him, a kind of calm power that replaced every drop of anger. "You want to take this from me?" he said softly. "Then you'll have to answer to the city, not me." The next day, he drove downtown to the Historical Society's office, carrying his folder under his arm. The building was old, covered in ivy, the kind of place that smelled of paper and memory. When he explained his story to the curator, the woman's expression changed from curiosity to awe. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "if what you're saying is true, this could be one of the last preserved heritage gardens in the entire county." She leaned forward. "Would you be willing to let our team visit and verify?" He nodded once. "They're threatening to destroy it. If you don't come soon, there might be nothing left." She placed a reassuring hand on his folder. "We'll come tomorrow." That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, watching the garden sway in the night breeze. The moonlight painted everything silver, the flowers, the stone path, the bird bath. It looked peaceful, but underneath that peace was tension, a calm before the storm. He thought of his grandfather, the man who taught him that beauty wasn't just decoration, it was legacy. He whispered softly, "Don't worry, old man. I'll protect it." The next morning, he stood on his porch as 3 cars pulled up. City officials, a historian, and 2 environmental inspectors stepped out, carrying clipboards and cameras. The HOA members appeared almost instantly, rushing down the street as if they owned the moment. Mrs. Aldridge was at the front, her voice loud and commanding. "You can't be here without HOA authorization." The city historian didn't even look at her. "We're here on a municipal order. You don't own this property." Her face turned red. "This is private neighborhood business." "Not anymore," the official replied. The city has reason to believe this land may contain preserved historical features. She froze, her eyes darting toward the man, who stood silently, watching her unravel. The officials spread out, taking pictures, measuring, collecting samples. When one of them lifted a stone from the path and gasped softly, everyone turned. "Look at this," he said. Carved on the bottom of the stone was a date, 1813. It was proof. The entire layout matched the original botanical design from the city's archives. The historian turned to Mrs. Aldridge. "This isn't a violation," she said firmly. "This is a cultural landmark." The president's face drained of color. What? From this moment, the historian continued, this property will be under city protection. Any further interference by your association will be considered obstruction of heritage preservation. The crowd of onlookers gasped. The man didn't speak. He just smiled slightly, the kind of smile that holds years of quiet satisfaction. Mrs. Aldridge tried to protest, but her voice cracked. "You can't do this." "It's already done," the official said, handing her a copy of the city order. She snatched the paper, her hands trembling. The man walked past her slowly, stopping just long enough to say, "You tried to ruin a garden. Turns out, you almost destroyed history." She didn't respond. She couldn't. Her world had just collapsed. As the city team packed their equipment and left, the neighborhood was buzzing. Cameras flashed, residents whispered, and for the first time in a long time, people were smiling, not for her, but for him. He stood in the middle of his garden as the wind brushed through the leaves, his heart steady, his breath calm. He looked down at the soil and whispered, "They thought you were weeds. Turns out, you were roots." That night, the entire neighborhood felt different. The HOA's power had cracked, and beneath that crack, something beautiful was beginning to grow, a truth that could no longer be buried. The next few days turned the peaceful neighborhood into something it had never been before, a stage for truth. The HOA tried to act normal, but the tension in the air was heavy, almost visible. People whispered in driveways, meetings were cancelled, and even the most loyal HOA supporters looked uneasy. Everyone knew something big was coming, but no one knew when. On a gray Tuesday morning, it happened. 3 city vehicles and a white van marked Cultural Heritage Division pulled into Willow Creek. Officials in neat uniforms stepped out, clipboards in hand, cameras around their necks. The residents peeked through blinds as the convoy stopped right in front of the man's house. The man was already waiting on his porch, dressed simply, his hands in his pockets, a calm expression on his face. His garden looked stunning even under the cloudy sky. The colors of the flowers stood out against the dull morning like a defiant burst of life. The city historian, Ms. Riley, greeted him with a handshake. "Mr. Bennett, thank you for contacting us. We'll begin our survey right away." He nodded politely. "Take your time. Everything you need is right here." Across the street, Mrs. Aldridge stepped out of her SUV, her heels clicking on the pavement, her face pale but determined. "This is private property," she barked. "You can't just walk in without HOA authorization." One of the inspectors turned toward her calmly. "We have a municipal order from the city of Brookfield. Your association has no jurisdiction over historical assessments." Her lips trembled slightly, but she forced a smile. "This is a misunderstanding. His property doesn't have any historical value." Ms. Riley looked at her briefly before replying, "That's exactly what we're here to determine." The HOA president stood stiff, arms crossed, pretending to stay confident, but her hands shook slightly. The inspectors spread across the garden, taking photos, writing notes, and carefully examining the old stones and plants. They moved slowly, methodically, treating every inch like a museum floor. One of them knelt beside the stone path, brushing away dirt with a small tool. "Look at this," he murmured. Under the dust was a carving, a faint pattern that matched the layout found in old city archives. "This matches the original design from the 1800s, he said in disbelief. "It's authentic." Ms. Riley's eyes widened. "This is incredible." She turned to the man. "Mr. Bennett, do you know how rare this is?" These aren't ordinary stones. They were hand-cut limestone markers used in the city's first botanical site. The man's expression remained calm, though inside his heart pounded with quiet pride. "My grandfather laid them," he said softly. "He told me they came from the old gardens before the highways were built." She nodded with deep respect. He preserved something priceless. Nearby, another inspector called out, "We found plant species on the Registry of Heritage Flora. These are protected under environmental law." The entire group gathered around, taking pictures and samples. The air buzzed with energy and discovery. Meanwhile, Mrs. Aldridge stood frozen near the sidewalk, her confidence draining with every passing minute. Her assistant whispered nervously, "This doesn't look good." "Be quiet," she hissed, her eyes darting around as reporters began arriving, cameras flashing, microphones ready. Someone must have tipped off the local news. The first headline appeared within an hour. Local homeowner's ugly garden declared historic landmark. The HOA's image, once untouchable, was crumbling in real time. By noon, the city officials held a short press briefing outside the man's house. Ms. Riley stood in front of the cameras, her voice firm and clear. "After preliminary review, we have confirmed that this property contains historical elements from the city's original botanical site established in 1813. It is now under protection as a designated cultural landmark. No alteration or removal of its natural features will be permitted without city approval." The reporters erupted with questions, but the only thing the man said was simple and calm. "They called it ugly. The city calls it history." The crowd murmured, impressed by his composure. Mrs. Aldridge tried to push through the reporters, shouting, "This is ridiculous. This isn't even official yet." But her voice was drowned out by flashing cameras and excited chatter. The inspectors walked past her with documents in hand, ignoring her completely. One of them handed the man a folder with a gold seal on the front. "You'll receive the formal designation within the week," he said. "Congratulations. You just made history, literally." The man accepted it quietly, nodding his thanks. He didn't gloat, didn't smile too wide. He just looked across at the HOA president, his calm eyes meeting her trembling ones. "You fined me $5,000 for preserving history," he said softly. "Now let's see how much it costs you to explain that to the city." She had no reply. She turned abruptly, her heels scraping the pavement, and stormed to her SUV. Cameras followed her, capturing the look of defeat she tried to hide. That night, the neighborhood was alive with whispers and excitement. Neighbors who once avoided him now gathered near his fence, congratulating him. "You did it," one man said, his voice full of admiration. "You really did it." Another woman laughed. "I used to think they were right about your garden. Now it's worth more than the president's whole house." He smiled politely, but his tone stayed humble. "It's not about money," he said. "It's about respect." Inside his house, he placed the gold-sealed folder next to his grandfather's old notebook. The two sat side by side, the past and the present united at last. He turned off the lights and looked out the window at his garden glowing under the moonlight. The wind moved through the flowers softly, as if the earth itself was breathing again. In the distance, he could see the dark silhouette of the HOA office, its lights off, its power gone. He whispered to himself, "The inspection's over. Now the truth begins." The next morning, the official city announcement hit every news outlet. Headlines read, "HOA tried to destroy historic site. City declares it protected landmark worth $500,000. The HOA's phone lines exploded with angry calls. Homeowners demanded answers. Reporters camped outside the president's house. The woman who once controlled everyone now hid behind closed curtains. And the man who once stood alone against her sat quietly on his porch, coffee in hand, as his garden rustled softly in victory. The news spread like wildfire. Within hours, the entire town knew about the homeowner whose ugly garden turned out to be worth $500,000. It was on every local channel, printed in every newspaper, and trending on social media. The headlines were merciless. HOA tries to fine man $5,000. City declares his garden a historic treasure. The name of the neighborhood, once known for its perfect lawns and strict order, was now a symbol of arrogance and corruption. The HOA office received hundreds of emails and calls. Some were from angry residents demanding resignations, others from reporters asking for statements. The president, Mrs. Aldridge, who once ruled with cold authority, now refused to leave her house. Her phone rang endlessly, but she couldn't pick up. Every ring felt like a reminder of her humiliation. The board members began turning on each other. In an emergency meeting held at the community center, voices rose like thunder. "You said we were within our rights," one board member shouted. "You told us to fine him," another accused. Mrs. Aldridge slammed her hand on the table, shouting back, "He broke the rules." "No," a younger member snapped. "You broke the law." The room fell silent. She opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. For the first time, she had no control, no script to hide behind. Across the street, the man watched from his porch as people entered and left the building in chaos. His garden swayed gently in the wind behind him, glowing with life, untouched, protected. He didn't need to fight anymore. The truth was doing it for him. That evening, the city's official letter arrived, confirming the landmark designation. The paper had a golden seal at the bottom and one final line that made everything worth it. "Any attempt to alter, fine, or modify this property will result in penalties under state heritage law." He read it twice, folded it carefully, and smiled. The same hands that once trembled holding fine notices now held proof that justice always finds its way, even if it takes time. The next day, the HOA board called an emergency town meeting to address recent events. The man attended, standing quietly in the back as the hall filled with residents. The room buzzed with tension. People who had once stayed silent now sat at the front, ready to speak. When Mrs. Aldridge finally walked in, the murmurs turned into outright whispers. Her perfect hair and sharp clothes couldn't hide the exhaustion in her face. She took the microphone, clearing her throat. "Good evening," she began, trying to sound composed. "We are here to clarify recent misunderstandings regarding the misunderstandings," a voice shouted from the crowd. "You humiliated that man." Another added, "You lied to all of us." "You made us afraid of our own yards," someone else yelled. Her hands trembled as she tried to calm the crowd. Please, I was acting in the best interest of the community." The man finally stepped forward. His presence silenced the room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You fined me for flowers," he said quietly. "You mocked something you didn't understand. You said it was ugly, but it turned out to be priceless." She swallowed hard, her voice weak. "You went behind our back, you involved the city, because you left me no choice," he interrupted. "You used power like a weapon. But power without reason always destroys itself." The room was silent except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan. One by one, residents began to clap. It started softly, then louder, until the whole hall was filled with the sound of applause. Mrs. Aldridge's eyes glistened with tears as she stepped back from the podium. Her authority was gone. The board voted that night to remove her from office permanently. By the next morning, her resignation letter was taped to the HOA office door. The neighborhood that once feared her now walked freely, their smiles genuine for the first time in years. Some homeowners even tore down their plain lawns and planted flowers in defiance of the old rules. Color returned to the streets, bright, wild, and full of life. The man's garden became the heart of the community. Families came to visit, children played on the path, and artists painted its beauty. The city even installed a small plaque by the gate that read, "Willow Creek Heritage Garden, protected in honor of those who preserved beauty against all odds." One afternoon, as he sat on his porch, a city official stopped by to deliver a check. It was for $500,000, compensation for the newly designated landmark's value. He accepted it quietly, his expression calm. The same hands that had once held a $5,000 fine now held a $500,000 treasure. But money wasn't what made him smile. It was peace. Across the street, The old HOA sign had been taken down. In its place, someone had put up a simple wooden board with painted letters, "Community over Control." It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the garden glowed in the orange light, the flowers swaying gently like they were breathing again. Neighbors gathered by the fence, sharing laughter and stories. A woman said, "You know, I used to be afraid of the HOA. Now I'm afraid of silence without this garden." He chuckled softly. "That's the point," he said. "They taught us to fear difference. But difference is what makes beauty real." As night settled in, he walked down the stone path, brushing his hand over the old stones laid by his grandfather. The air was cool, the world quiet. He whispered softly, "It's over." Somewhere, in a dark house down the street, Mrs. Aldridge sat by her window, watching the garden she once tried to destroy. Her eyes filled with regret. She had all the power once, and she lost it all because she couldn't see what was right in front of her. The man didn't hate her. He didn't need to. Some punishments don't come from anger. They come from peace. The kind of peace that can't be taken, fined, or controlled. The weeks that followed felt like a dream, not because the man had one, but because peace had finally returned to the street that once hated color. Every morning now began with birdsong instead of arguments, laughter instead of warnings, and flowers blooming where fear once grew. The city's decision to name his garden a historical treasure changed everything. Reporters visited often, school groups came to learn about the preservation of native plants, and the mayor himself came one afternoon to present the official landmark certificate. Cameras flashed, neighbors cheered, and the man stood humbly beside his garden gate as the mayor said, "This property represents not just beauty, but resilience. It reminds us that rules without understanding destroy what they claim to protect." The man smiled softly and said, "Thank you. I didn't do this for recognition. I did it because this garden means something." Behind the crowd, a familiar face watched quietly from afar, Mrs. Aldridge. Her once proud posture was gone, replaced by silence and regret. She no longer shouted, no longer carried her clipboard like a weapon. She stood near the sidewalk, arms crossed, eyes down, as if hoping not to be seen. But people did see her, and they didn't fear her anymore. They pitied her. After the ceremony ended, the man walked over to her slowly. She turned to leave, but he spoke softly, "You can stay. It's public now." She stopped, her shoulders tense. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered. He studied her face, the same face that once smirked while fining him for flowers. "Maybe not," he said quietly, "but power blinds people faster than greed. You couldn't see what was beautiful until everyone else told you it was." She looked at the ground, tears glistening in her eyes. "You made me look like a fool," she said bitterly. "No," he replied, his tone calm, almost kind. "You did that yourself." She turned and walked away, the sound of her heels fading down the street she once ruled. The next week, he received a letter from the city, official confirmation of the $500,000 grant awarded to him for maintaining a designated heritage property. The letter stated that the garden was now part of the Brookfield Cultural Trail, linking it to local museums and parks. The same land that the HOA called ugly was now on maps, brochures, and tourist guides. When he read the letter, he didn't shout or celebrate. He just sat on his porch for a long time, holding it in his hands, feeling the weight of years of struggle lifting away. Later that afternoon, he visited the bank to deposit the check. The teller, a young man who recognized him from the news, smiled. "You're the guy with the garden, right?" he said. "Man, that story was everywhere. $500,000 for plants? That's wild." The man smiled faintly. "They are worth more than that," he said quietly. When he returned home, he found neighbors waiting at his fence with flowers and cards. "We wanted to say thank you," one woman said, handing him a small bouquet. "You changed this place. You made us see things differently." He accepted it kindly, his voice calm. "The garden did," he said. "I just listened to it." That evening, he decided to do something he had been planning for weeks. He called the city and arranged to open the garden to the public once a month. When the first open day arrived, cars lined the street, and families walked through the gates with wide eyes. Children ran along the stone path, touching the old carvings, laughing as butterflies danced around them. The man stood near the entrance, greeting visitors, answering questions, and watching people fall in love with the very thing that once brought him pain. "It's like walking through time," one visitor said. "How did you create this?" He smiled softly. "I didn't create it," he said. "I just kept it alive." The local news covered the event, and the headline read, "The Garden That Fought Back, a $500,000 lesson in patience and pride." The video went viral. People from other towns began visiting, inspired by his story. They called him the gardener who defeated the HOA, but he never liked that title. He wasn't proud of defeating anyone. He was proud of proving that beauty doesn't need permission to exist. As months passed, his life became simple again. But this time, peaceful in a different way. He didn't need to look over his shoulder for fines or threats. The HOA office had been dissolved entirely, replaced by a new neighborhood committee that focused on cooperation, not control. People were free to plant what they wanted, paint their houses in colors they loved, and be themselves without fear. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, he sat on the porch, looking at his garden glowing under the golden light. He sipped his tea slowly, his heart calm. Across the lake, the wind carried the sound of children laughing. For the first time in years, it felt like home again. He walked down the old stone path, stopping near the small plaque that bore his grandfather's name. He knelt, brushing a bit of dust off the surface. "You were right," he whispered softly. "Patience always wins." As he stood up, the sound of soft footsteps made him turn. It was Mrs. Aldridge again, holding a small pot of flowers. She looked nervous. "I thought maybe these would fit," she said quietly. "They're daisies." He took them, looked at her, and nodded. "They'll do," he said with a small smile. Together, they planted them near the edge of the path in silence. She didn't say another word, and she didn't need to. Sometimes silence speaks louder than apology. As the stars appeared overhead, the man looked at the glowing garden and felt something deeper than victory. It was peace. He whispered to himself, "They tried to find me for beauty, and beauty paid me back in gold." The night wind moved softly through the flowers, carrying the scent of lavender and history. The battle was over. The lesson would last forever. Months passed, and the once quiet street of Willow Creek was no longer the same. The lawns that used to look like lifeless green carpets were now blooming with color, each house showing a bit of personality again. Roses climbed fences, sunflowers leaned toward the morning light, and laughter replaced the whispers that once filled the air. The HOA that once ruled like a shadow was gone. Its office turned into a small community center where neighbors met to talk and share ideas instead of argue. And at the heart of it all stood the man's garden, the place that started everything. It had become more than just land. It was now a symbol of freedom, a reminder that peace grows only where control ends. Every weekend, people from nearby towns came to visit. They'd walk the old stone path, stop by the birdbath, and read the small bronze plaque by the gate that said, "Willow Creek Heritage Garden, protected forever." The man never charged anyone. He'd sit on his porch with a cup of tea, waving as people passed by, his face calm, his eyes warm. He didn't crave fame, and he didn't care about the money. What mattered to him was the sound, the wind rustling through the leaves, the children's laughter, the life his garden breathed into the world. He often thought about how it all began. A $5,000 fine, a few cruel words, and an old notebook filled with memories. He smiled whenever he remembered how Mrs. Aldridge called it unsightly. Now her words were carved into irony, because the same garden she mocked had become the most beautiful thing in the city. Sometimes she would visit quietly, never staying long. She would place a single flower near the gate and leave. He never stopped her. He understood. Guilt was its own punishment, and forgiveness didn't need words. One evening, just before sunset, the man stood by the edge of his garden, looking at the horizon glowing in gold and red. The flowers moved gently with the wind, the same wind that once carried the sound of HOA threats. Now it carried peace. His neighbor, a young boy who often helped him water the plants, looked up and asked, "Did you ever think you'd win?" The man smiled. "It wasn't about winning," he said softly. "It was about standing still when everyone else told me to move." The boy tilted his head. "But you were right, right?" He chuckled lightly. "Sometimes being right doesn't matter. What matters is doing what feels true." The boy nodded, looking at the garden in awe. "I want to make one like this someday." The man placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then start with one seed. That's how every garden begins." As night settled in, tiny lights flickered through the plants, fireflies, like floating stars. The man sat on the old wooden chair beside his porch, his cup steaming in the cool air. He could hear faint music from a neighbor's house and the soft hum of people talking near the gate. The world was peaceful again, and for the first time in years, his heart felt light. He thought of his grandfather, of the hands that once built this path, and whispered, "We did it." The air was still, but it felt like the earth itself had heard him. In the distance, Mrs. Aldridge stood for the last time at the corner of the street, watching silently. The guilt had faded from her face, replaced by quiet acceptance. She had lost everything she once used to control others, but in that loss, she found something she didn't expect: humility. She turned to leave, stopping for just a second to glance back at the garden bathed in moonlight. "It really is beautiful," she said under her breath, and then disappeared into the night. The man watched her go from afar, not with anger, but with understanding. Sometimes victory wasn't loud. It was silent, calm, and eternal. He leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed, listening to the sound of life all around him. The flowers swayed gently, the lake shimmered, and somewhere nearby, a small child laughed. A sound that meant everything was finally right again. The camera of fate would have panned slowly upward here, catching the glow of the garden under the stars, the bronze plaque shining like a promise that peace, once earned, never fades. His last thought before closing his eyes that night was simple but powerful. They tried to bury beauty, but they forgot it had roots. And as the night wrapped the world in silence, his garden stood there, alive, eternal, and undefeated.